Today we'll be looking at the complex story of one of the most rare PS2 games out there, Kuon. Released in 2004, Kuon is a survival horror game developed by From Software. It was released in Japan, but wasn't until April 14th, 2006 that it received a European release. Fast forward to today's market and copies of this game go for around £600. Mint and sealed copies of the game go for thousands. I managed to find a copy for my collection, however the cover ended up being a reprint, so I returned it. But what makes the PAL version of this game so rare and expensive, a holy grail for game collectors? With the game being released by publisher Agitech, the game didn't have a lot of appeal and received not very favourable reviews, so the game fell into obscurity. It didn't help that there weren't that many copies printed. Having actually experienced it for myself now, I can say that Kuon was actually a pretty decent survival horror game. Again, as can be expected with survival horror games of this period, the combat left a lot to be desired, but similar to Rule of Rose, which we covered on the channel recently, the emphasis here was on story and atmosphere. The game, which hit about 8 hours in length, featured 3 playable characters which were representative of the Yin Phase, the Yang Phase, and the Kuon Phase. The game is centered around a story inspired by Japanese ghost stories, specifically Kaiden ghost stories from the Edo period. Kaiden ghost stories generally revolve around karma and vengeance being carried out by ghosts to punish bad deeds. The game itself takes place in Kyoto, Japan during the Heian period, which ran from 794 to 1185, and a time when Kyoto was named Heian-Kyo. This period was known as a time when Japan's cultural identity started to really mature and leave Chinese influences behind. The Heian period also saw the rise of the Japanese imperial court, which is essentially now the Emperor of Japan. The thing is that power had actually been held by Japanese nobility, an aristocratic family named the Fujiwara clan, who had married into the imperial family. Now, a disclaimer, if you've played any of From Software's titles, you'll know that they don't really tell you much of what's going on. You'll kind of have to piece it together for yourself. Therefore, there may be some things that I did miss in this story, so feel free to comment those things down below. But that's enough about the history of the game and the story's background. Let's jump into the plot. Our story follows 2 sisters, Utsuki and Kuria. When they were younger, Utsuki and Kuria were living a life of complete isolation at a shrine on top of a mountain. Their father forbade them to ever leave. At some point in their young lives, Utsuki and Kuria were playing, and Kuria had an accident, falling off a cliff. Somehow, Kuria survived, more on that later, and Utsuki committed her life to caring for her sister. Their father, Doman, was once a royal exorcist, and has been called to the nearby manor of the noble Lord Fujiwara. One day he'd left a note for Utsuki, saying that he's been summoned and will be gone for some time. He says that Lord Fujiwara believes that the manor is cursed. He instructs Utsuki to take care of the shrine and the silkworms, and to take care of Kuria too. Essentially, Doman's not returned, and the sisters have gone to the manor to see what's happening. Arriving, the front door is sealed by silk. Removing the seal, they enter, despite them feeling an uneasiness about the place. They immediately come to a clearing and hear the sound of voices singing. Kuria seems to be feeling unwell, but she insists that she's fine and that she can continue to search for their father. Utsuki comes across a dead body and spots someone scurrying away. Going after that someone, Utsuki is hit by a tempest, a strong field of negative spiritual energy fueled by revenge, murder, or a grudge. And this causes Utsuki to experience vertigo. The tempest causes a pagoda to fall over, and since it's blocking the way, and because she can't simply step over it, Utsuki has to find another way around. She calls out to Kuria, who is on the other side, but she seems to be in a trance. She walks away and towards the manor. Utsuki eventually comes to a large tree, a mulberry tree. She finds a metal spike on the ground nearby, which is used to suppress demons, along with a wooden disc decorated with the carving of a silkworm. She then spots another corpse, which has a trail of blood leading from it. She also spots a strange creature in the distance too, which is eating the corpse that she'd just come across minutes earlier. The creature then attacks her. This creature is something called a gaki. Basically, the gaki is a hungry ghost, the spirit of jealous or greedy people whose punishment is an insatiable hunger. Using her knife, Utsuki defeats the gaki. Heading towards a small shrine, Utsuki hears the singing voices again. The voices are originating from 2 small children, twins. They say that they are all dead, and that someone called Ayako is the last one living. They pose the question, is Ayako still really alive, before laughing and running off somewhere. A note on the door is addressed to Lady Fujiwara. Whoever wrote it, likely one of the servants, says that they have placed wooden discs and 2 spikes, similar to the ones Utsuki just found, at various places around the manor's estate. The aforementioned Ayako has 1 spike and the seer, who's inspecting the manor, has the other one. They then sign off the memorandum by stating that they're going to hide in the garden, and they ask her to take care of herself. Utsuki then hears something jump into the pond, and the 2 children walk across the bridge. The doors to the shrine are boarded up and people appear to be inside. A gaki is banging on the door, and a seal is on the door, preventing Utsuki from entering. Moving over the bridge, Utsuki comes to the small shrine and it's missing discs and spikes needed to open up a passageway behind the shrine itself. So, as directed in the note earlier, Utsuki must find these discs and spikes in order to continue, and she needs to find Ayako. Returning to the mulberry tree, Utsuki spots someone else there. A young woman who places a vessel into the water and carries out a ritual used for cleaning oneself of negative spiritual energy. Finding herself being attacked by a gaki, Utsuki calls out for help and the young woman summons a saiga, a wolf spirit that defeats the gaki. Thanking her, the woman introduces herself as Sakuya. Explaining who she is and what she's doing there, Sakuya says it's not safe there, but she gives Utsuki some magic summoning cards to help her defend herself. The 2 then go their separate ways. Heading into the Easton garden, Utsuki finds a dead gaki and more bodies lying on the ground. Fighting even more gakis, Utsuki has made it to the other side of the pagoda that fell over earlier on. She then finds a really strange note from Korea, and it mentions that she'll be away for some time, but that she'll prepare many victims for her to merge with. Heading into the manor, Utsuki finds a statue of a guardian dog. She finds a way to Ayako's room, but the young woman runs into a room and locks the door. A letter from Lady Fujiwara, Ayako's mother, states that she went to the temple and that if it was safe there, she'd come back for her. She would signal it's safe by ringing a bell outside the door. In order to get Ayako to open the door, Utsuki needs to find this bell. Lady Fujiwara ended the letter to her daughter by saying that if she hadn't returned in 10 days, she should gather the wooden discs and spikes and go to the temple. Peeking through a hole in the wall, Utsuki sees a very scared Ayako in the locked room, but she also sees a ghostly figure crawling out from under a dresser. To her surprise, it's Korea, who then stares straight at her. In the servant housing area, she finds a servant's diary which speaks about Ayako being terrified of demons, but more importantly that the bell can be found at the North Pavilion. Moving on through the manor, now knowing where she needs to go, to the North Pavilion, Utsuki fights more gaki, encounters ghosts, along with other strange enemies, but she eventually comes to find a green book covered in teeth marks. The book mentions the seals on the doors in the manor and that someone named Miyoshimaru used a blood-stained cloth and rubbed it on the seal. A nearby man's body falls over and a blood-stained cloth slides out from under him. Picking up the cloth, Utsuki moves on. Using the cloth on the door and removing the seal, Utsuki finds herself in another part of the manor. Entering a blood-stained door, she finds her father there. He's doing something to a body and placing it inside a wicker chest, and the process is extremely bloody and gruesome. Utsuki speaks with Doman, and he asks her where Korea is. She says that the song that the small twins were singing put her in a trance, and then she disappeared. Doman isn't happy, but he gives her another blood-stained cloth, and this will allow Utsuki to open doors with another type of seal on them. He says that he needs to take care of something and tells Utsuki to find her sister and to watch over her. Using the blood-stained cloth she got from her father, Utsuki finds one of the metal spikes embedded in a pillar. Judging from a nearby note, it was put there by the seer that the servant mentioned in their note from earlier. He writes that the spikes had been used to suppress a gaki. Removing the spike, sure enough, a gaki jumps down and attacks Utsuki. She kills it, and having retrieved another of the spikes she needs, she leaves the room. She sees Korea dragging someone down the hallway, and going after her, she hears something behind a door, and to her horror, she sees the silhouette of someone or something eating a corpse. Utsuki heads into an area populated by even more corpses, and she finds another guardian dog statue and another blood-stained cloth. Inside another room, she finds a small altar, and placing the 2 dog statues on either side, the door on the shrine opens and she receives one of the wooden discs she needs, with this one being the Beast disc. Avoiding more ghosts, Utsuki encounters 2 people who are wearing the same garments as Sakuya. As with most other people in the manor, the man is hostile, and Utsuki is forced to put him down. Entering a large room, she hears the faint sound of a bell ringing. Approaching the source of that ringing sound after being hit by a tempest and meditating to center herself again, she goes to grab the bell but is attacked by the very deformed and ghostly Lord Fujiwara. His limbs are twisted and he crawls around like an insect, groaning. Using any tools at her disposal, Utsuki manages to defeat the Lord of the Manor. Afterwards, she grabs the bell, looks back at the corpse of Lord Fujiwara, and leaves the room. However, something else seems to happen to him. With the bell in her possession, Utsuki heads back to Ayako's room, and ringing the bell, she opens the door. She's absolutely terrified. Utsuki enters the room and says that she senses an evil, a presence wanting to devour souls. Ayako says that for some time, she's been hearing a song being sung at night, and she mentions that disease has spread through the manor, and the hungry roam the manor at night time. All of a sudden, twins appear, saying that they've found Ayako, and she screams. Korea stands behind her, and just like that, Ayako screams again, and she then disappears. Leaving the room and heading back outside, Utsuki uses another bloodstained cloth on another small altar, and receives the final disc, the GROTESQUE. Utsuki then heads back to the shrine and puts the discs and spikes in place. The door to the shrine then opens, and a ladder leads underground. The tunnel takes Utsuki up and into the temple. Utsuki hears a chanting coming from one of the rooms, and she also discovers large amounts of what appears to be silk all over the floor and walls. She also discovers a bloody cocoon, and something is wriggling inside of it. Utsuki eventually finds the source of the chanting. It's the priest, Nyoe. He is grievously injured and dying. He's been bound in place by silk. He tells Utsuki to hurry before the cocoon takes her. He also says for her to watch out for the sick, and that if the sick don't merge with other creatures soon, they will die. Finally, he mentions that corpses are needed for cocoons before being killed by one of the sick people. He drops a medicine jar and Utsuki grabs it and leaves the room. Returning to the cocoon from earlier, it ruptures and a Gaki emerges from it. Killing the creature, she can now pass through the corridor the cocoon was blocking, and she spots Korea dragging a wicker chest down another corridor. Following her, she is startled by the twins who block the path and start singing their creepy song. Utsuki heads into the room where Korea went. She finds herself in the main part of the temple. She sees a statue in there, the Buddha of Emerald Light and the Master of Medicine. Using the medicine jar she got from the priest, she places it onto the hand of the statue, and this opens up an entryway to another tunnel. Heading down the strange tunnel, Utsuki finds another blood-stained cloth, and Korea walks away behind her. Continuing to follow the tunnel, Utsuki discovers the body of an astrologer. She finds a door that is sealed and that she cannot open. Backtracking, she is attacked by another creature that emerges from a cocoon. This one crawls along the ground, and defeating it or running from it, Utsuki heads back upstairs to the temple again, and she is hit by another tempest. Rendered unable to move, she falls to the ground and is approached by Korea, and Utsuki asks her sister if she needs it again. Passing out, Utsuki then wakes up inside a wicker chest, and emerging from it, she finds herself back underground. Fighting more sick enemies, Utsuki uses a scythe to cut through silk which is blocking a tunnel. And further into the tunnel, she finds her father down there. Asking him what he's doing, he replies that he's caring for the people in the cocoon. He echoes what the priest said, that unless the sick people merge with another creature, they can't survive. Utsuki realizes that this also means Korea. Doman says that entering a cocoon 9 times will cure them. He then says in order to help Korea, Utsuki must allow her to assimilate her flesh and her blood, to which Utsuki obviously declines. Her father then says that she is the reason Korea is dead. He tells Utsuki that she should get into one of the wicker chests. He then walks away. Walking further down the tunnel, Utsuki hears Korea shouting. Peering through a crevice in the wall, Utsuki sees Korea throw Utsuki's own dead body off a ledge and onto a wicker chest. Going back to where she spoke to her father, she sees Korea there and she breaks open a cocoon and continues on down another passage. Following her sister, Utsuki encounters the twins again, and they say that Korea is very close. They lead Utsuki into a room full of wicker chests. One of them in particular has both Korea and Utsuki's bodies lying on top of it. The twins tell Utsuki that if she wants a new life, then she should enter the wicker chest. If she enters a cocoon, she will return to where she was. The twins say that two will merge into one and dream a long, long dream. Looking into a body of water, Utsuki then sees her reflection as Korea, and she then presumably gets into the wicker chest and then wakes up at the Torii shrine near to her home. She spots a trail of blood leading somewhere. Following the trail, she discovers a wicker chest at the end of it, indicating that something had crawled out of it, and inside the chest she finds another blood-stained cloth. Climbing up a rope ladder, Utsuki is immediately attacked by more Gaki. Moving on up, she comes to a storage shed and finds a barely alive man in there. He addresses Utsuki as a new victim and goes on to say that he is allowed to live because he produces cocoons. The room is littered with corpses that are entangled in silk. Exploring her nearby home, Utsuki heads into her room, and she finds a diary written by herself which mentions a game her and Korea used to play called Sogoroku. She also finds more ruptured cocoons. Heading into the actual shrine itself, Utsuki walks through a small passageway and encounters a very scared exorcist named Dokai. He's one of Sakuya's colleagues. He crawls off up the passageway screaming that he does not want to die, and going after him it's very clear that he too is infected. He becomes hostile and Utsuki is forced to fight and defeat him. Heading through a hole in the wall, Utsuki finds a blood-stained diary that belongs to Korea. She talks about falling off of a cliff, thinking that she was going to die. However, when she came to, she discovered that there was not a scratch on her. She awoke inside a wicker chest. She goes on to write that she was becoming gradually weaker, but that she's keeping it to herself. About 10 days later, she discovered strange marks all over her body and did her best to hide them. She was sure that her flesh was starting to rot, mentioning a horrible disease. Not long afterwards, Korea wrote that she met some twins, and they told her to sleep inside the chest with the silkworms for a night. And she did so, and when she awoke, she felt normal again. She attributed the twins' appearance to a manifestation of the Mulberry god. She would see the twins again and they told her to sleep inside the cocoon again, but that instead of sleeping alongside silkworms, she should instead sleep alongside a rat, that she must hurry or her arms and legs would rot and fall off. She began to envy her sister's healthy arms, legs and neck, and she writes that she told her father about it, and he told her about a ritual involving resurrection and cocoons, and that when the corpse starts to rot, it must become a cocoon, and every time that this happens, the human needs to merge with a larger creature than the previous time. This must be done, just as Doman said earlier, 9 times. Then, shockingly, she writes that when she woke up in the wicker chest, she realized that it was Utsuki who pushed her off of the cliff. Bizarrely, something comes over Utsuki and she says that she had no choice. She then writes something in the diary. I'm looking at what she wrote. It says, "Today I killed Utsuki. Her body will soon merge with mine." What on earth is happening? Heading into the shrine again, she uses a newly acquired bloodstained cloth and accesses another sealed door. She's at the shrine entry area and has to fight more Gaki, and it's not long before she encounters the twins again. They're excited that Utsuki is awake. Strangely, the other twin appears to be dead, badly burned too. The remaining twin points Utsuki to the mulberry tree, and approaching it, she has a flashback and remembers what happened at the mulberry tree. She recalls that Korea was holding onto a rope ladder which had broken. Utsuki was holding the ladder in order to try and help her sister, but she was surprised by the twins, and as a result, Utsuki dropped the ladder, therefore resulting in the death of her sister. After this flashback, more strange behavior takes place, as Utsuki then jumps off the edge, plummeting to the ground, but she wakes up underground again. Slightly confused as to what happened, Utsuki finds a small shrine and she walks behind it and into a cave. Using an iron wedge, she breaks down a weakened section of the wall and emerges into another area where she encounters a surviving twin again. The girl is sat by a wicker chest and she tells Utsuki that a new life is about to be birthed. Utsuki enters into a library, and inside she finds a book. Research carried out by her father, and it reads that no one is actually able to recover from this strange disease. Her father then arrives. He says that the assimilation process has advanced considerably. Questioning him about entering the chest 9 times curing the disease, he throws Utsuki away from him and he says that she is stupid and that she shouldn't believe everything that she hears. He then tells her she should not resist her cravings and that she should merge with another. He then lets out an evil laugh and again, strangely refers to Utsuki as if she's Korea. He tells her the truth, that Utsuki didn't kill Korea at all. The Korea was placed inside the cocoon by the twins. Still referring to Utsuki and Korea, he shames her for not believing her own sister. Calling her worthless, he eventually walks off, laughing. Leaving the library and entering the main cellar area, Utsuki approaches where the remaining twin is sitting. The twin follows her, but eventually Utsuki comes to a barrier and says that she must merge with someone, and like Korea, her flesh appears to be rotting. She hears Sakuya calling to her from the other side of a barrier. Sakuya tells Utsuki that she can't stay there as Korea is, well, something. She's obviously discovered some strange truths during her time in the manor. Utsuki tries to grab Sakuya, trying to forcefully merge with her. This is where the Yin Phase ends. The Yang Phase takes place alongside the Yin Phase. The campaign is the same in some areas, however there are some differences to the narrative as it's a different character, but there is a good reason for this, which we'll get into soon. Now let's discuss the Yang Phase, which follows Sakuya. Sometime before Utsuki and Korea got to the manor, a group of exorcists turn up outside and discuss what they're going to do. But a bit about Sakuya. She was born into the Kamo family, who are by trade a family of exorcists. Despite her being a woman, she became an exorcist herself. In the Kamo family, women were seen as inferior, and she studied under Doman, Utsuki and Korea's father. The other exorcists there are Doman's other disciples. There's Sakuya's brother, Doryo, the young Dochin, and Dokai. Doryo says that it's actually been a month since Lord Fujiwara disappeared. Sakuya enters the carriage area of the manor with Dochin, and they search the area. Sakuya is attacked by a Gaki, which she defeats, and she then heads inside the manor itself. She eventually speaks with her brother Doryo. He is inspecting a seal on the door. He shows Sakuya how to remove these seals using a sacred cloth, stained with the blood, and the seal will be removed. Using this new knowledge of how to get rid of the seals, Sakuya comes across Dochin, who teaches her about cleansing herself by transferring and releasing toxins. At some point too, Sakuya spots the twins, who point her towards a blood-stained door. Inside the room, she encounters and fights a Gaki. One of her fellow disciples, Dokai, walks in. He seems on edge and seems very interested in the wicker chest, and he tells Sakuya to go away. A little later, and arriving in the garden as we saw before, Sakuya saves Utsuki from being attacked by a Gaki. Moving on, Sakuya finds her way to the shrine, and she sees Dochin there. He mentions that they can't enter from the front because of course the shrine is missing 3 discs and metal spikes. Sakuya somehow, the very same way that Utsuki did, witnesses Ayako Fujiwara running away and locking herself in the room, witnessing the ghostly apparition of Korea in the room with Ayako, retrieving the bell and fighting Lord Fujiwara, and returning to Ayako only to see her get killed by Korea. Don't worry, there's no way that both characters can experience these exact same things, but that will become clearer a bit later in the video. Finding the 3 discs and 3 spikes, Sakuya returns to the shrine, but on the way she sees Doryo and Utsuki, with her brother stating that he's decided to try and help Utsuki find Korea. Moving on, and at the shrine, Sakuya places the discs and spikes inside, and her and Dochin head through the tunnel passageway and end up inside the temple. Hearing chanting coming from inside the temple, Dochin is hit by a tempest. Approaching the source of the chanting, Sakuya comes across the priest, who at this point is not dying or affected by the disease. He tells Sakuya that he is there helping and comforting the sick, that they have a disease and that if they don't merge with other creatures, they will all die. He tells Sakuya to leave and that he is doomed to share their fate. Moving further down the hall, Sakuya spots the twins and hears them singing. Following them into the main part of the temple, Sakuya sees them open up the tunnel area by using a medicine jar and placing it into the hand of the statue. Sakuya heads down the passageway and into the main cellar. There, just as Utsuki did, she finds the body of the astrologer. A note next to the astrologer says that where the twins led Sakuya is the feeding ground, and that she was tricked by the twins. He says that Lady Fujiwara will be there soon, and that she's not exactly human. Heeding the note's advice and heading back into the temple, she hears someone screaming for help. It's Dochin. He says he's glad to see Sakuya, but the words have barely left his mouth when he's carried away and taken by a woman back into the temple. Going after them, Sakuya emerges inside the temple and sees the woman hunched over a wicker chest. The woman is Lady Fujiwara. Well, what's left of her. She's a grotesque monster now. Fighting the monstrous form of the Lady of the Manor, Sakuya eventually defeats her. Unfortunately, it appears that she killed Dochin and was attempting to merge with him. His writings offer up advice on what to do next. He wrote about a mountain path that goes by the west gate, and that it leads to another temple. Exiting that particular building, Sakuya heads out of the west gate and finds Doryo, Utsuki, and Korea waiting for her. Yeah, Korea is apparently fine now. Doryo says that they are about ready to climb the mountain and to visit the shrine. After the necessary introductions are made, they all set off with Sakuya lagging behind in order to watch their backs. Eventually, Korea reverts to the Korea we all know and love and ends up attacking Sakuya with some ghostly mates. Avoiding or killing some vicious Yamabito, Sakuya makes it to safety and speaks with Utsuki. She says that the sick people have blocked the path and that path is the only way up. Sakuya needs to find something to hammer a stake into the ground so she can use the rope to pull herself up. Heading to a nearby cabin, she spots a Yeti inside, and waiting for it to vacate, she heads inside and grabs a mallet. Upon leaving though, the Yeti confronts her and she is forced to fight the beast. After putting it down, she returns to Utsuki and gives her the mallet, and then Sakuya is able to pull herself up and onto the path. Heading up the stairs and into the shrine, they both meet up with Korea and Doryo by the mulberry tree. Korea is holding a silkworm and laughing with Doryo. He says that a Gaki has followed them there, so he asks Sakuya to go and deal with it, so she does just that. Heading into Utsuki's room, Sakuya spots Dokai, who according to his journals, had been carrying out various experiments on Gakis and wicker baskets. I guess this explains his fascination with the wicker basket earlier on. Anyway, Sakuya walks by a window and sees something. She sees Korea push Utsuki off the cliff. Doryo lies at the foot of the mulberry tree and he's unconscious. Rushing to return to the tree, Sakuya reaches the shrine hall, but she ends up being confronted by Dokai. Seems his experiments have changed him. Not surprised, as one of his experiments involved getting inside a cocoon. He says that he's revealed the mystery of the Kuon ritual and that he wishes to merge with Sakuya. Forced to fight him, she defeats him and finally returns to the tree. Doryo and Korea are no longer there, but following a trail of blood, Sakuya is confronted by a partially merged Korea and Doryo after they emerge from a wicker chest. Choosing to fight or to run, Sakuya finds an old ritual mirror. Returning to the tree once again, she sets fire to the mulberry tree and she climbs down the cliff via the rope ladder. Korea throws the ladder down the cliff, meaning that there's no way back up via the ladder now. Using the mirror on the altar, this removes a large boulder in front of the cave, and Sakuya heads inside. Exploring the underground area, Sakuya is being observed by the surviving twin as the other one was burned to death, and she encounters Doman. He's surprised Sakuya is alive, but says that the other three served their purpose. Essentially, they were just food. Sacrifices. Sakuya is furious that their mentor sent them to die. He explains that the disciples were essentially just a manifestation of his power. He mentions that Sakuya is to now join the dead and complete the chest of 9 grudges. Attempting to attack her master doesn't go very well as he quickly dispatches her before leaving. Going after him, she is confronted by the surviving twin, who ends up sending Korea after her. In her attempt to escape Korea, this brings the two stories to their conclusion, as the two then meet in the underground area with Utsuki trying to forcefully merge with Sakuya. Utsuki, in defiance, then pushes Sakuya away, and Sakuya says that she'll go and find a way to save her. Now, before we get into the final section of the plot, I feel that we need to take a moment out from the plot. There's a lot going on here. Wicker baskets, mulberry trees, creepy singing children, merging, rituals, and not a lot is clear. Not to mention the fact that we have two very similar but also two very conflicting storylines taking place. It's a bit of what's called a kudzu plot, a plot which gives birth to more questions than answers, with it being a tangled web of threads. It's a bit of a head scratcher of a story, but we'll now attempt to break it down a bit. First off, we need to establish that Utsuki is an untrustworthy storyteller. What happened in her Yin phase? Well, a lot of it never actually happened, and what did happen was wildly distorted, as the memories were likely borrowed memories. Throughout the entirety of the Yin phase, Utsuki is dreaming. The true events of what happened at the manor were seen through the perspective of Sakuya. One interesting thing is that during the Yang phase, playing as Sakuya, we see this scene which shows Doryo and Utsuki together, with Doryo saying that he'll help her find her sister. In the Yin phase, in which we were playing as Utsuki, this event never actually happens. Another thing is that in the temple, playing Utsuki, she places the medicine into the statue's hands, whereas playing as Sakuya, the twins do this. The moments where Utsuki speaks with her father, both in the manor and in the nursery underground, in Sakuya's Yang phase, he's not there, as for the entire game he's been waiting and preparing for someone called Abe no Semai to arrive. There's also the difference in reaction during the boss fight with Dokai. When fighting Utsuki, he thinks that Utsuki is Korea and is terrified. Very different from his demeanour when fighting Sakuya. This is because when Utsuki is fighting Dokai, this is one of Korea's memories. Lastly, at the end of the game, in the Yin phase, Doman calls Utsuki Korea and says that Korea killed Utsuki. This is so Korea could merge with her sister and be reborn. This is why their diaries seem so jumbled. It's because they are one person, but that share two sets of memories. Utsuki and Korea would even fight each other to become the dominant personality too, and this ties into Yin and Yang. We see this when what we think is Utsuki writing that Korea killed Utsuki in the diary is actually the personality of Korea coming forward as the dominant one, and that's why she has a slightly evil look to her for a moment. Despite this fight between them, they would occasionally appear as two separate people, which is how Sakuya and Doryo saw them. Yeah, I know, it's very confusing. It's not confirmed, but it's possible that anyone subjected to the merge or the ritual is now part of a collective shared consciousness, hence what appear to be shared memories. Perhaps the dream that Utsuki is projecting are memories from both Korea and the twins too. Maybe, but that's just a theory. One day, Doman gave his daughters a Sogoroku game, which they enjoyed playing, although Utsuki would always beat her sister at it. At one point though, the pieces disappeared. Unable to find them, their father said that they should stop looking for them. Utsuki then found herself praying to the Mulberry Tree. Later she would come to realise that the Mulberry Trees are malicious. So in the year 830 AD, a silkworm shrine was erected by the first priest there, and the shrine was to be looked after and watched by a member of the Hatter clan. The priest planted mulberry trees. One located at the shrine and the other in the manor were to be revered and considered sacred. It seems that the mulberries were found by members of the Hatter clan a long time ago and were taken back to Kyoto. It's thought that they came from either China or Korea. Doman writes about a man named Zhu Fu, who had gone from Japan to China seeking eternal youth and immortality. When Ashaya Doman became the priest in charge of the silkworm shrine, he investigated the silkworms which were worshipped there, and he found that they are not the same as ordinary silkworms. He found that not only did the silkworms come from the trees, but also that the parents of the silkworms are incarnations of the two sacred mulberry trees. The mulberries that grow on the trees are their eggs, and the silkworms born from these eggs have magical powers. As a result, the silk threads from the cocoons also have magical power, is incredibly strong, and cannot be broken by anyone. What's also true is that the silkworm threads would also be used on doors, and this thread essentially seals the doors, and in order to remove it, one must rub a cloth soaked with the blood of an individual that has been revived the same number of times as the amount of time the silk thread has been used. Yeah, I know, it's complicated. Doman surmised that the silkworms can bring back the dead by spinning cocoons around corpses, and this also means that they must feed from humans. Doman became obsessed with this type of dark magic, and he succumbed to the evil, spending a lot of time attempting to master this magic. Doman would continue to research, and he would deduce that these mulberry trees are essentially living creatures more intelligent than humans. He also used mannequins in order to test the cocoons and to test the strength of the threads. Doman eventually found out that entering a cocoon 9 times does not revive the dead at all. So what about the twins? 2 identical trees, 2 identical twins. Each twin is the manifestation of one tree's spirit, and there were 2 trees. So basically they're not human, and their goal is to repopulate. This is very strange, but the dead are actually then reborn as the twins' children, as new mulberries, and Doman discovered that the spell had only ever been intended for silkworms and not for humans. Doman would also discover that Korea is different from other subjects that he's used before, and he thinks that it may be because she is his daughter that she's able to benefit from the ritual more so than other people such as Lady Fujiwara, who of course turned into a grotesque creature. Now, if the cocoon ruptures too early, merging will be a failure. Early stage failures result in someone emerging as a mass of flesh, onyo. Later failures will emerge as gaki. The cocoon would grow inside the chest and the chest would protect it. The new human then emerges from the cocoon, the wicker chest, and this is why Korea was dragging wicker chests around the place. Doman had plans for subduing the mulberry twins after the Kuon ritual was completed, and he'd figured out that he could use fire, but that would completely destroy them, rendering them unusable should he need them again. This is seen that in after Sakuya burns one of the mulberry trees, one of the mulberry twins ends up extra crispy and very dead. Doman found a way to suppress them using demon suppressing spikes, and this was to push the spikes into the holes in the mulberry trees. Another thing to mention regarding the cocoons is that after being cocooned with another human being, the other human being then absorbs the grudge of the other person, as that is how they sustain themselves. Hence why Doman referred to the Kuon ritual as the 9 grudges. Throughout the game, Korea merged with Lord Fujiwara, Aoko, Doryo, Utsuki, and one more, but that's to be revealed in the final chapter. As both of our characters get to the manor after everyone has already died or are afflicted by the strange disease, it's left to the many notes around the game to give us a good idea of what happened there at the manor. The disease itself is the Kuon curse, which is passed from human to human and makes one go mad and crave human flesh. The finer details of how it all started are unclear, but we can be sure that Doman was right at the centre of it. Servants began noticing that residents of the manor started disappearing, only to turn up later having been rather gruesomely killed, and these corpses wouldn't exactly stay dead. Astrologers were also called to the manor, but astrologers cannot exorcise demons. Lord Fujiwara was convinced that the manor was cursed, so he contacted a friend. This friend arranged for a disciple of a renowned noble seer named Abe no Semai to visit and assess the situation. The friend wrote and warned the Lord about a renegade seer, Doman, who had been boasting about his power and who claimed to be the equal of Semai, but who had strayed from the seer's path. The seer would arrive and would conduct a full investigation at the manor. He'd write that his mentor told him to look for metal demon-suppressing spikes and that if he found any, to leave the premises. He'd go on to write that he met the elder priest of the shrine, Nioe, who told him that the shrine was dedicated to a mulberry tree which has 3 spikes in its trunk. The following day, the seer visited the tree. He noticed that no spikes were in the tree, and that the spikes were used to confine evil within the tree. He became worried about what had been released. Fear soon started to spread around the manor, with Ayako particularly frightened. She would shut herself in her room, weeping silently in the hope that demons would not notice or hear her. As we saw in the game, her mother, Lady Fujiwara, promised to ring a bell when it was safe for her to come out. The priest at the temple would write that he'd hear sounds emanating from underground. He'd hear them even louder at night when he was sleeping, describing them as a cross between agony and pleasure. He writes that there's a legend that a creature had emerged from the bowels of the earth, and that the temple was built in order to stop the creature. He thinks that maybe the creature has been awakened underneath the temple and is howling. Not long after, Lady Fujiwara had left the manor with a lot of sick people, accompanied by the seer. However, according to his writings, Gakis had taken over the manor. He says that Lord Fujiwara is dead, and he writes that he must now take care of the Lord's wife and children. Lady Fujiwara, who'd arrived at the temple, was worried about what the sick people would do if they weren't being watched, and she asked that they be kept in the temple, as she believed that Gakis cannot enter the Buddhist temple. The priest writes that Lady Fujiwara had contracted the disease too. Lady Fujiwara would, of course, never return to Ayako to ring the bell. I guess the best account of looking at this sickness or this disease is to look at how it affected Lady Fujiwara. She writes about her experiences in her diary. As we saw from what the priest wrote, Lady Fujiwara, despite contracting the disease, was first making sure that everyone else was okay by making sure the sick people were placed inside the temple and had the doors to the temple boarded shut. As evidenced by more journals in the manor, we can deduce that as well as having a daughter, Ayako, Lord and Lady Fujiwara had a son who was never actually named. He would write about one of the servants, a young boy named Miyoshimaru, and would document the growth of some silkworms that Miyoshimaru gave to him. Anyway, that's not too important. Lady Fujiwara would notice her flesh rotting and wrote that she needs to distance herself from her children as she believes that she is no longer human. She ordered Miyoshimaru to seal the front gate, and she hoped that this would prevent the disease spreading further. A few days later, she writes that she felt faint and woke up inside a wicker chest. She said there were no silkworms inside it, only a centipede. And a few more days later, Lady Fujiwara said that her neck was throbbing with pain. The priest then provided her with a room in the temple. She hoped that the disease would not progress any further. But days passed with her locked away. She sees soft flesh and is overwhelmed by the desire to eat it. And she mentions that she's unable to control her hunger. She is lonely and only has her cat to talk to, and she speaks of hearing a song. It's the song of the twins. She writes of wanting to chew flesh and drink blood when she hears it, and she vows and tells herself that a mother must never kill her own children. Days later, she has a strange feeling while stroking the cat. She speaks of how soft it is, and she hears the song once more and loses consciousness. She wakes up inside a wicker chest with the cat dead next to her, and she speaks of feeling a lot better. She mentions something moving around inside of her, and whatever it is, she must stay vigilant. Then, her son comes to see her, and she's very happy. Through various notes that were written by the servant boy Miyoshimaru that he'd written on mulberry leaves, he said that he saw Lady Fujiwara eating her own son. As I mentioned earlier, and as we've just seen, Lady Fujiwara didn't merge quick enough, and this made her hungry for flesh, to the point where she was no longer able to control herself. When we see Lady Fujiwara in the temple, she transforms into a grotesque centipede-type creature, and this is due to her merging with the centipede, and for some reason, she took on certain characteristics from the centipede itself. As mentioned before, this ritual is not meant for humans. But now let's get into the final phase of the game, and look at the game's ending, the Kuon Phase. Before, lore, we learn that Doman trained up disciples. He actually had a fierce rival, another sorcerer named Abe no Semai. As mentioned earlier, Semai is a renowned noble seer. The truth is that Doman despises Semai so much that he wants to use her as the final sacrifice for his Kuon ritual and for other purposes too. She arrives at the manor with two spirits either side of her named Zenki and Goki, and she's there, I'd presume, after the seer she'd sent there never returned. Heading through the manor, Semai arrives at the tree. She says that she smells something coming from the tree itself. She spots the holes in the tree and correctly says that they were created by metal demon-suppressing spike, as metal subdues the tree's energy. Wondering who would willingly disturb this balance, she realizes that she needs more metal spikes. Moving forward, Semai finds many metal spikes, and returning to the tree, it seems that Sakuya took a severe beating. The surviving Mulberry twin is there clapping her hands and singing her creepy song. Semai jams a single spike into the tree which, as expected, has an effect on the twin. Recognizing Sakuya as one of Doman's disciples, Sakuya tells Semai what happened, that Doman used them as sacrifices. Semai is not at all surprised by this revelation, and Sakuya tells her that Utsuki is somewhere in the cave, having fallen victim to Doman's evil magic. She asks her for her help, and to let Utsuki finish the ritual. Heading into the cave to find more spikes, Semai eventually comes across Utsuki, who has burned all the hanging bodies in the cave in order to stop herself from eating them. She says that the singing isn't as loud now and that she feels calmer. That'll be the suppressing spike in the tree. She's appearing as Utsuki and not Korea, as she's been able to become the dominant personality. Leaving her there, Semai finds enough spikes and begins to head back to the Mulberry Tree. On her way back though, she is confronted by Doman. He wants to turn her into a cocoon. He calls her a worthy sacrifice for the Kuon cocoon. It seems that this was his goal all along. He wasn't as interested in resurrecting his daughter as he was on beating his rival. He also wanted to make Semai his puppet and for her to whore herself to him. The two then fight one another. Semai is pretty powerful, more so than Doman, and that is evident as she easily defeats him. He groans and says that if he'd completed the Kuon cocoon, he would have been able to ruin her. Dropping to the ground, dead, Utsuki is stood behind Semai. Abandoning herself to her desire for flesh and blood, she takes her father's body and drags it off to a wicker chest. Sakuya bleeds with Utsuki to stop what she's doing, but to no avail as Utsuki strikes her away. Exiting the cave, Semai jams the spikes into the tree, sealing it but not destroying it. Semai says that she has no choice but to destroy the chest, as she simply does not know what kind of monster will come out of it. Sakuya pleads with Semai not to destroy the chest, and she ultimately gets her way, as Semai leaves without destroying it, giving Sakuya the rest of the spikes in case she needs them. Not long after Semai has left, Sakuya leaves the manor and she is joined by a new Utsuki, reborn as a new Mulberry, and they leave, with Sakuya completely unaware of what may happen to Utsuki in the future. And the game then ends. And that is it for the story of Kuon. A pretty good, if not complicated story, in classic From Software style, and as mentioned before, a lot of the game's story wasn't spoon-fed to you, and you have to scratch beneath the surface to figure out what's going on. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Leave a comment down below, but for now, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.